Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we'll take a look at some new Am I the A-hole stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one posted by user ThrowOyFar. Titled, AITA for not letting a neighborhood kid cut my grass? I live in a neighborhood in a rather large city, so I'm actually surprised I'm having this issue. It leads me to believe I'm unknowingly displaying some a-hole behaviors. My wife and I have lived in this house for around 2 months now. Our city has a program where you can turn your yard into a wildlife habitat, and it's something my wife is really into. She has been researching low-maintenance local grasses, wildflowers to plant in the yard. Our backyard wasn't planted before we moved in, so we thought we'd start experimenting with the backyard. The previous owners had some poorly sodded grass in the front yard, and we planned on replacing it after we figured out what grows well. On the day we were moving in, a kid, 13 or so, came and cut the grass in the front yard. He said he had contract with the previous owners to maintain the yard. The yard looked pretty terrible, so I paid him and told him we won't need his services. He took his money and went off. A few days later, the neighbor on the left came to introduce herself to my wife and I. She mentioned that Ty, the kid, does everyone's yards. His mum is disabled and it helps them bring in money. I was like, oh cool. Thanks for letting me know, and went on about my business. Next month, Ty is back and ready to mow the brown grass in my yard that doesn't need to be cut. He's about to get started without asking, and I tell him it's not necessary. He can go along to his next house. He looks confused with me and says, "You don't want me to cut it for $20? I told him it wasn't necessary, and that he didn't need to worry about my yard anymore. He made a long face, so I gave him a 5 and he went over to the next house. The neighbors to the other side came over and said, "You don't need your yard cut?" And I said no, smiled and went back inside. From then on, it seems like my neighbors are ignoring my wife and I, even some neighbors that we haven't met yet. We wave and say hello while walking our dogs, and they look and ignore us. I'm like, what the duck is going on? I got the opportunity to ask my neighbor what is going on, and she made sure to let me know how selfish it was to not let Ty cut the yard. I tried to explain to her what my wife and my plans were, but she didn't care. Just called me selfish. I said, what should I pay the kid to not cut my grass? She rolled her eyes, and joined the ignore train. Feels weird being frozen out by your neighbors? Am I doing some asshole thing I don't realize? User comment, not in a hole. Ty is trying to earn money to assist his mother. Definitely not the a-hole in this situation. From the perspective of your neighbors, you moved in, and then cut Ty off from making his money. That's been a pattern for what seems like many years. It seems like a misunderstanding. You're not in a hole for not wanting your lawns cut to suit your new, environmentally friendly initiative. Is there a way you could pay Ty for doing something else for you so he can still earn money? Maybe he could help potting plants for your new yard, or help fix up your car. I don't know, just seems like something nice you and your partner could do to help him and his mother out, although you're not obligated to. User comment, you guys are the new kids in class where everyone has a shared agreement you hadn't been privy to. Not the a-hole. You don't know the kid or his family, you don't have a connection to him like they do. Logically, why would you pay to have work done that you don't need? They choose to do that because they know him and his family, but that doesn't mean you're under any obligation to as well. You've paid him both times you've seen him, yet the neighbors can't mind their own business and are rude. If you want to do something nice for the kid and his family, and have the money, perhaps have a chat with him. Maybe you can cut a new deal, have him do some other yard work that would take about the same amount of time to do. Perhaps he could do some watering or weed pulling for you guys rather than mowing. User comment, not the a-hole. I think it's nice that some of the neighbors have this arrangement to help out, but it's not an obligation on everyone in the neighborhood in perpetuity. I think you handled it well, just too bad your neighbor was a jerk about it. Next one posted by user Alipu. Titled, AITA for giving my husband specific rules for a new car? My husband has lots of cars, about half do not run. He drives a van daily, and I'm getting a little money in, so I told him that if we move to the nearby city, he can have a portion of that money, $2,500, for a fuel-efficient car. He agreed. We looked at used cars together and we found a couple he loved. Tonight I told him that I found a great place in town, and that he can still get a car, but it should be a truck or a fuel-efficient car. Now he wants a Lincoln. He says because he pays for everything it should be a present for him. But I'm unemployed, in grad school, and the money for the car was not a present but a compromise to save us some money in the long run. He says that I'm treating him like a child because I'm giving him rules that he agreed to. He says because we're getting extra money in, he should be able to buy what he wants. I feel like he's putting me in a bad spot where I have to be the bad guy and say no. He supports us and I know he's been depressed lately, but I don't think I'm wrong here. Update, now he's crying saying that I disrespected him and he wasn't really going to get a Lincoln, and I should have known that. Now he doesn't want anything. User comment, not the a-hole. Act like a child, get treated as a child. You don't get to demand a present as an adult. That's what children do, spoiled children. User comment, not the a-hole. He's being childish. If he's saying he doesn't want anything now, then he gets nothing. You were setting sensible parameters on a big joint purchase, not making arbitrary rules to spoil his fun. User comment, this sounds like a bit of a problem to be honest. If you're in the position that $2,500 is a situation-changing amount of money and he's got a bunch of cars sat on the drive, it's a clear case of misprioritization. Cars are an expensive habit and it sounds like the extent of his habit is not currently affordable. Honestly, if I were you, I'd be insisting on him getting rid of some, or at the least a strict monthly limit on how much is spent on them, but at the very least not buying yet another useless vehicle is a must. Not the a-hole. Next one posted by user, it's_Woody. Titled, AITA for parking in a vacant parking space. So I live in a street where there is almost none on-street parking. Our rent agreement allocates us one parking bay that we use for my partner's car, and since the beginning of my tenancy we've parked my car out the front of my house. This has been going well until someone leaving my street has gone past my car and scratched the paint and left without notifying me at all. I'll just clarify that where I park is allowed, anyone can park where I chose to park. After seeing what happened to my car, we noticed that our next door neighbor hasn't used their car park space at all. Turns out that the person renting next to us is actually living a few hours away now with her boyfriend, so it's vacant. One of the neighbors said that parking there will be fine for me. I've left them a note through their door asking for consent to park there whilst she's away. Anyway, so I moved my car, and this morning I've woken up to a note through my door from a random neighbor telling me to move my car out of the space. AITA for parking there? Should I move my car? Or should I find out who's sent this note to have a discussion with them? User comment, you're the a-hole, sort of. They could have relatives that come round to the apartment, for example. It's not like you've done anything majorly wrong, but you don't have permission to park there, so don't if you want an easy life. There could be a whole host of reasons why this note was sent through your door. People are busybodies too. Just unnecessary hassle because at some point you'll have to go back to parking on the street anyway. User comment. Baby a hole here. You should really get the approval of the neighbor whose parking spot it is before utilizing it. I've found that trusting a third party can lead to all sorts of confusion. If you get official approval from the current owner of said parking, preferably in writing to ensure, as these things have the potential of backfiring, then feel free to utilize the space. Next one posted by user, MDM_Pomfrey. Titled, AITA for being upset about neighborhood fireworks? A 4th of July fireworks issue. Hold on to your patriotic hats. Note: fireworks are illegal in our state. Also, we have never met any of the people mentioned below before this event. My husband and I have lived in our house about a year. Last year we were out of town on the 4th. This year we plan to be home. We received a note in our mailbox the day before from the neighbors directly behind us. They were notifying us that they do a big fireworks show every year and provided their phone numbers to contact them in case any debris landed in our yard. They said they would be happy to pick it up and we should not have to worry about cleaning up their mess. Well, dusk comes and I head out to my backyard to see the show. They are setting off professional-grade fireworks in the ditch across from our houses, about 50 yards from our property line. These suckers are huge, the kind you would expect to see at a community show. And for 45 minutes our property, about 1 acre, is getting littered with debris. There were pieces of cardboard, propellant, ash, and embers falling all over our yard, driveway, patio, and roof. There were probably thousands of pieces of cardboard in our grass alone. So once the show is over, my husband texts the names from the letter to let them know we had an issue with the debris. In a few minutes they come to our backyard and chat with my husband. He expresses concern about the danger of these huge fireworks directly over our home, plus we had debris everywhere. He was upset. They were upset. There was no shouting or anything, but both parties felt like the other was wrong. In short, they say, we will be by tomorrow morning first thing to clean it up, but we've been doing this for years and no one has ever had an issue. My husband's reply was essentially, well, we live here now and it's an issue. I was considering notifying the sheriff, but I didn't want to ruin everyone's time. They seemed pretty upset and they left. Today we get up, expecting to see them in the morning for cleanup. Well, they eventually get here around 2 o'clock after a text to check in. The neighbors are still being really grouchy about the situation, telling us that we just need to be patient. They do this for the kids, no one has ever complained besides us, etc. A small group of people work on cleaning our driveway and one neighbor comes over with his mower to pick up the yard. As my husband is standing in the driveway with the man who put on the show, another neighbor drives by, stops his car, and threatens to kick my husband's butt for ruining 4th of July, and repeatedly screams, "You're being a little witch." Both sides thought the other was wrong. We feel like the issue is now resolved since the mess is cleaned up and no lasting damage was done, but it was still not safe and was damage to our property. They likely feel like we are spoil sports and threatened them with the sheriff. But is the neighbor right? Did we ruin the holiday? AITA? Edit, we talked more with the neighbors that put on the show. Everyone is cool and we agreed to work together next year to figure out a safer way to have fireworks that everyone can enjoy. User comment, not in a hole, the neighbors did the right thing by warning you ahead of time and by cleaning up after. I don't think it's a holy shit all to be taken back by the scale of the fireworks. You had no point of reference if they're than their subjective description and you have legit concerns about the safety of it all. For next year, maybe there is a way that they can alter the event to make you more comfortable with it. Or, if the whole neighborhood is as involved as your neighbors claim, maybe it can be relocated. User comment, not the a-hole. They notified you, left phone numbers in case if any debris issue and you texted them. You brought up your concerns. Fireworks can light up your house and there's nothing wrong with being concerned. If you just straight up hate fireworks, seeing as you went out to watch, so no, then you're the a-hole, but I'd be pretty upset equal, so where did you go wrong? User comment, not the a-hole. My personal feelings about fireworks aside, they're illegal in your state, and you can celebrate 4th of July without fireworks. Next one posted by user EGETA 444. Titled, AITA for confronting my rude neighbor. I own and work at a dry cleaning business. I had for the longest time an incredibly nasty client visiting me on the regular, almost every week, in fact, even during lockdown. He'd always bring in absolutely filthy bed sheets and pillow covers. We are talking about poop stains and mystery smells here. Never had the correct amount of money and fought over it every time, and only used hand sanitizer after he gave me his rags. By what info my wife told me and what I overheard while in the back of my shop, I found out that he actually lived in the apartment above mine, meaning that not only he was a pigsty of a person, he also was the same man that heavily swore in the wee hours of the morning and stomped up and down his place, waking my son up and scaring him, and had done so for months, a situation that had only worsened during lockdown. Due to this client's boorish behavior, I had nicknamed him Shrek, and I told my son that Shrek had left Fiona, took a potion turning him human, and then went to live upstairs from us, which was good enough to get him to stop being scared at his heavy steps and his Tuscan blasphemies against God at strange hours, and to let me sleep peacefully enough. When restrictions relaxed, I could finally take my son out to play in the park once more. As we were leaving, I saw Shrek come down the stairs. My son asked him if he was really an ogre and why did he leave Fiona, and Shrek turned around to stare at him weirdly. I freaked out and ran back in, embarrassed to no end, and told my son to never do that again. But my wife has reamed me in about my reaction, telling me that I should have gone to apologize, and then have a talk with Shrek, as he was still a repeat customer however unwanted. She also damage controlled the situation with my son by talking about tact to him. When my summer holidays started, I decided that it was a good time to try to talk some sense into Shrek, as he was still stomping and swearing at night. So, I went upstairs and knocked on the door, but the conversation went south. He answered the door by blaspheming and telling me I was single-minded because he thought I was out for some coins. Then he started to give me excuses for his behavior, such as working at an helicopter factory at night, living together with an incontinent college girl, and saying insulting God was part of his culture and that I needed to get over it. Since I was fed up, I contacted his landlord and the condominium administration. They said they'd look into it, but nothing was done, and, while he toned down his swearing, he kept on stomping. So I called the police for disturbance of the public quiet. My wife has been giving me grief about this, saying that he's not all that bad and that maybe I should have tried to be less confrontational. Was I really the a-hole? User comment, not the a-hole. Your family is entitled to respect from your neighbors. He should be more mindful of that. Your neighbor sounds like an absolute ass. Next one posted by user, Spill. Titled, AITA for trying not to get ran over by a car. Today I was on a nice Thanksgiving walk around the neighborhood with my family. I was slightly in front of everyone and came up to a car with two people in it, seemingly about to back out of a driveway across the sidewalk I was walking on. I was unable to make eye contact with the driver to make sure he saw me, and there was glare from the sun, so I couldn't tell if his reverse lights were on. So, I gave his trunk a soft friendly pat so he'd know someone was behind him and wouldn't back into me. I literally patted it about as hard as I'd pat a dog's head. It would be impossible for me to have done any damage. I continue walking, and in a few seconds he gets out of the car and is absolutely livid, yelling at me, "Did you just ducking hit my car, bro?" I very calmly try to explain my reasoning and that I meant no harm, but I can't get a word in since he just continues yelling at me. Then the girl gets out of the car, and I think she's going to calm the guy down, but then she starts yelling at me too. By this point the rest of my family is there and yelling at the guy not to swear around the children. I say I'm sorry, kind of half-heatedly, sarcastically to be honest, and we walk back home, thinking it's over. A few minutes later we're in the front yard again, and this dude and his whole family now shows up, across the street, maybe 30 feet away, and starts yelling, "Which one's your car? How do you like it if I smashed your windshield?" At this point I'm kind of scared and thinking we might need to call the cops. I apologize again, this time more sincerely, just hoping he will go away, and they finally leave. This was such a strange experience, as I'm definitely a non-confrontational person and can usually just explain myself and find some common ground if someone is mad at me, but this guy wouldn't even let me talk. In retrospect, it probably wasn't cool for me to touch his car, and I could have been more sincere the first time I apologized. But overall I feel like he overreacted and wasn't being reasonable. Who's the asshole here? User comment, not the a-hole. Dude sounds like he has anger issues. He could have just looked at his car to check for damage, and the fact he brought his whole family is just weird. User comment, everyone sucks here. You're right, you shouldn't have touched the car at all. There is no world in which tapping the car backing out is how you handle that. You can stop and wait to see what happens. You can wait for your family. I don't understand what caused you to do this in the first place. They're the actions of a person who gets hit by cars and doesn't know why, and the shitty apology on top of it means I don't think it's not the a-hole. But his reaction was ridiculous. User comment, if you were in the sidewalk, not the a-hole. If you stepped into the sidewalk around the car possibly backing out, it depends on the surroundings, but he might have had no way to see you. Nothing you did warranted how it escalated, nothing justified that. Last one posted by user, Jaggedum. Titled, WIBTA if I went against my neighbor's dying wishes? This sounds bad, and maybe it is, but hear me out. My neighbor, let's call him Albert, has been a family friend for my entire life, and he was always very close to my dad. Like 30 years ago, Albert was together with a woman who had a daughter, let's call her Susan. They lived together for about 2 years before the relationship ended. Since then she has almost never visited Albert, never called etc. When Albert got cancer and was on his deathbed, Susan suddenly started caring about him. We were the ones who looked after him as he was dying though. Albert wanted us, his brother and Susan, to divide his possessions amongst us after his death, but wanted to give the house to Susan. He was so worried that we would fight and told my father to make sure we didn't. Susan lives about 2 hours away. Albert has always been a huge animal friend, and for about 2 years before his death he had fed this stray cat every morning and night. When his cancer got bad we fed him because Albert couldn't move freely. We assured him that we would continue feeding the cat after he had died and he seemed relieved. After Albert had died Susan said, "Now you don't have to feed him anymore," which we found really strange. Anyway, after he had died we fed the cat and even called the local animal shelter to try to make sure the cat got a home. Then, Susan decided that we couldn't enter Albert's house anymore. We agreed and started bringing cat food from home. But, my dad got in and got the remaining cat food. They had put up cameras and called the police on him. However, my dad suspected from early on that Susan was trouble and Albert signed a document which allowed my father to enter the property until everything had settled. Still we didn't enter the house anymore after that in order to respect Albert's wishes of not fighting. But then, Susan didn't want us, nor the people from the animal shelter, to enter the property again, so she called the animal shelter and said that she would feed him 4 times a week, meaning morning and night on Saturdays and Sundays. Like I mentioned, Albert did not want us to fight, but now I'm fuming. Albert cared for that cat, and Karen made it so he probably will continue living as a stray when he even had a prospective home already, and only get fed 2/7 days a week, instead of the bright future with the family who wanted him. Neither one of us in my family wants any of Albert's possessions, but we do want to make sure the cat will be fine as we have grown fond of him, and that would be what Albert wanted. I was happy to sit back when she was just greedy for his possessions, but now that it influences the cat? Would I be the a-hole if I went against Albert's wishes and fought for the cat? P.S. Other things she has done: took a photo of Albert's body right after he had died and cleared his entire home of valuables after his death when Albert wanted us to split his possessions amongst us. User comment, not the a-hole, if you can somehow resolve this issue in the least conflicting way possible. I can't really offer advice or anything, but I can tell that Albert cared for the cat greatly, so I believe he would want the cat to be happy. Best of luck moving forward. User comment, not the a-hole for adopting a cat she doesn't want, but I'm a bit confused about the cat. If it's a stray, can't you just put food out, or does she keep it in the house? When you say neighbor, are these properties close or far away? Op comment, it's like 5 minutes walking distance away from us and we don't want to put the food outside our house since we have cats of our own and they have sometimes been fighting. Susan doesn't allow us on his property anymore. He has been fed in the same spot for over 2 years, so he usually waits there. We have however still been feeding the cat on the neighbor's property that's directly beside his and trying to get him to eat there instead. But really, Susan doesn't want us to feed him whatsoever. Thanks for listening.